All right, today we are diving deep into a really powerful and frankly often invisible psychological dynamic. It's called the Identity Dependency Loop. It's a process that can subtly, quietly rewire our entire sense of self, and just understanding how it works is the crucial first step to taking back control. The most striking truth about the Identity Dependency Loop is this. It doesn't work by convincing you that the other person is a god. It works by convincing you that your own self is a dangerous, incompetent ghost. We tend to think of our identity as this solid internal thing we carry around with us. But in really high-pressure dynamics, our brains can get nudged into outsourcing our personality to a dominant partner, pretty much just to survive. So why is it that the very person who claims to complete you so often ends up making you feel like you've completely disappeared? It's a huge paradox, right? This is the core of the dependency loop. It's the moment when our natural human ability to adapt and attach to others gets turned into the very tool of our own psychological erasure. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how that happens. To really get a handle on this, we're going to move through 5 key sections. First, we'll explore how your identity gets outsourced in the first place, which kind of sets the stage. Then, we'll look at the specific mechanism that makes it all happen, dig into the psychology of control behind it, and then, most importantly, walk through the actual steps to reclaim your personal sovereignty. Okay, so before we can even get to the mechanism itself, we've got to understand the environment it needs to work. This isn't some sudden, hostile takeover of your mind. It's more like a gradual, almost invisible transfer of power that starts when you willingly hand over the keys to your own internal world. The clinical term for this whole thing is externalized self-regulation. And this isn't just a feeling, okay? It's a documented cognitive shift where your brain literally rewires itself to look outward for answers it used to find inward. You stop asking, what do I think? And you start asking, well, what would they think? And this can happen anywhere, in intense relationships, with a high-stakes mentor, or even in these super tight-knit groups where loyalty is everything. And the process often kicks off with something called the integration hook. This is the first really critical narrative trick. See, the controller doesn't just attack your past, they reframe it. They convince you that your life before them was somehow less, uninformed, shallow, maybe incomplete. Your entire history gets devalued, which makes this new, shared reality feel like a massive upgrade. It's a really clever setup because it makes you a willing participant in erasing your own foundation. And the result of this whole setup is a symptom called identity vertigo. Now, this goes way beyond just being indecisive. It's often a physical sensation of panic, of total disorientation when you're facing even a tiny choice, what to wear, what to eat. It's this feeling that your own judgment is so fundamentally broken that making a choice without their approval feels physically dangerous, kind of like you're standing on a cliff edge with no safety net. So when does a connection finally cross that line and become a cage? Well, it happens the moment your need for their approval completely erases your own needs. This is the big turning point. It's known as identity dissolution. You literally stop noticing what you want or what you feel because you've been conditioned to believe your own internal signals are defective. You basically become a ghost to yourself, and the only person who can see you, the only one who can make you feel real again, is the very person who orchestrated your disappearance. This really illustrates the fundamental power shift that happens. On one side, you have the source, the person who originates the thought. They set the filter for reality. And on the other, you have the echo. And the echo doesn't just lose their voice. Over time, they lose the very habit of forming their own thoughts. It's not about just agreeing with them. It's about using their internal logic to think for yourself, constantly checking in with this imagined voice of them in your head before you do anything. And this puts it perfectly. The connection isn't a bond. It's a social fortress used as a cage for your conscience. What feels like this intense, unbreakable connection is actually a trap. It looks like a protective wall built around the two of you, but its real job is to imprison your intuition and your independent self. Okay, so now let's look at how this setup builds into a really precise, almost clinical 3-step process. This isn't random. It's a pattern of behavioral management designed to systematically dismantle a person's autonomy, piece by piece. All right, here is the engine of the loop. Step 1 is the shared soul phase. The controller mirrors you perfectly. They love what you love, they hate what you hate. This triggers a biological response, an oxytocin flood, right? The bonding hormone. It feels absolutely incredible, but it also shuts down your critical skepticism. You trust them completely. Then comes step 2, strategic de-skilling. Once that trust is locked in, the dynamic shifts. Every single independent choice you make is now met with subtle criticism, a little disappointment, some concern, a joke at your expense. The goal is to make independence feel stressful, slowly training you to just stop trying. And that leads to the final brutal step, the dependency lock-in. Once your confidence is totally shot, they withdraw their validation. The approval you rely on just vanishes. This causes a state of affective panic, a truly terrifying feeling of emotional freefall. And at that point, you're not just seeking their approval. You're desperately begging for their control just to make the pain stop. The long-term result of this cycle is something called identity atrophy. Just like a muscle that you stop using, your sense of self begins to weaken. Your brain literally gets reconditioned at a very deep level. The simple act of thinking for yourself, of having a separate opinion, starts to feel like you're starting a fight. And compliance, just agreeing, just going along with it, feels like safety. It's a profound rewrite of your brain's entire threat detection system. I know this all sounds so insidious, right? Which raises a really crucial question. Why are we so vulnerable to this kind of thing? This isn't about being weak or not being smart. This whole process works because it hijacks fundamental parts of our human psychology and even our biology. So let's explore that psychology. We're going to look at the controller's motivation on one side and the target's vulnerability on the other. It's really the combination of these two things that makes this loop so terrifyingly effective. So let's be crystal clear about the controller's motivation. It might not always be conscious, but the goal is total narrative control. Think about it. If someone can control your story of who you are, if they can define your strengths, your weaknesses, your past, your future, they gain absolute and effortless leverage over everything you do. They don't have to force you to do anything because you'll do it willingly, believing it was your own idea all along. On a biological level, this works through something called affective hijacking. Affective just means it's related to our moods and emotions. As social creatures, our brains are literally wired to be influenced by the people around us. But in this dynamic, that wiring gets completely exploited. Our mood regulation system gets outsourced to the controller. Their approval gives you a dopamine hit. Their disapproval feels like a genuine physiological threat. It makes their validation feel as essential as air. And this connects directly to the target's core vulnerability, the need for high significance. And look, this is a deeply human desire. We all want our lives to have meaning, right? To feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. A controller exploits this by offering a powerful, all-encompassing shared purpose. The catch is that the price of admission to this greater whole is the surrender of your identity as a separate person. You end up trading your autonomy for a feeling of profound significance. Okay, so understanding the trap is the first huge step to dismantling it. So let's pivot from the problem to the solution. This is the ascent back up, the practical, actionable steps you can actually take to reclaim your mental territory and restore your own sense of self. The journey back starts with one simple question. Do you still know what you like? Not what they like, not what you're supposed to like as a team or a couple, but what you as an individual actually prefer. This isn't about being confrontational. It's about conducting a quiet internal audit of your own mind.
And a fantastic tool for this is what's called the decision audit. For the next day, or hey, even just the next hour, just pause as you make small choices and ask yourself, is this my authentic choice, or is this the choice that's expected of me? The answer might actually surprise you. The goal here isn't self-judgment at all. It's simply data collection. You're just trying to see how much of your day is driven by your own preferences versus the ones you've adopted.
So once you have that awareness, you can start to act. First, recognize the hook. That feeling of self-doubt, that identity vertigo, it's a biological symptom of conditioning. It is not a personal failure. Next, practice micro-autonomy. Think of it like physical therapy for your sense of self. Intentionally make a small, private choice the controller might not approve of. Listen to a song they hate. Order a coffee they think is weird. The specific choice doesn't matter. The act of choosing is everything. Each one of these small acts proves to your brain that you are a separate entity, and it rebuilds that atrophied muscle of independent thought. And ultimately, all of these steps are about embracing this one foundational belief. Reclaiming your sovereignty isn't about winning a fight or proving them wrong. It's about giving yourself permission. The simple, radical, and incredibly powerful acceptance that you are allowed to be a separate person with separate thoughts, feelings, and preferences. And this brings us to what might be the most important takeaway of all. After you've experienced this loop, it can feel like your old self is just gone forever, erased.
But that person wasn't erased. The version of you that existed before is not dead. They might be quiet, maybe buried under layers of conditioning and doubt, but they are still there, just waiting for you to start listening again.